Hi, everybody. This is David Nevins for Citybiz List, and welcome to our program today. We're happy to have you. And today we continue with another of our discussions on behalf of an organization called the Bridge Alliance, which we're calling Repairing America's Broken Democracy. So welcome once again. And our guest today is Shari Davis, and she is with a project called Participatory Budgeting Project. So, Shari, I think we're all familiar with what participatory government is and participatory democracy, but your project is a little bit different. So first, let me say welcome and tell us a little bit about your work.
David, thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to be here. Again, my name is Shari Davis. The pronouns that I use are they, them, and she, her. And at the Participatory Budgeting Project, we think about building community power to make direct decisions about budgets and policy. You might argue that a budget decision is a policy decision, and we might argue that we agree with you and that it's important for community members to be able to shape, design, affirm, and build what local budgets look like, what regional budgets look like, but also what regional policies look like that impact and affect the people that live in those spaces. Our work is really about designing and going through a community process where community members become incredible financial stewards and incorporated into the fabric of a particular institution or space with something called participatory budgeting. This community-driven process where folks that live in a place are able to think about ways in which they can make their community better, investments that need to happen so that they can live and thrive, and then actually be able to vote on what those investments are after developing ideas into concrete proposals so that they can see and touch change in their community that they drove forward.
So, Shari, if you don't mind, can you give us some examples? I think you kind of spoke about your work at we'll say the 30,000 foot level. Tell us, how you're affecting change in various communities.
100%. And as we zoom down from that 30,000 view kind of foot level, one thing that I'll say is that participatory budgeting is still about 12 or 13 years new in the United States. And it's like 30 plus years old globally. But so far in the US, we've seen community members come together to make decisions on over $40 million in public funding, tax dollars for community members. And we've seen over 800,000 community members across the country participate in those decisions. Right now, we're seeing processes be launched, like in a place like Seattle, for example, that's doing a $30 million participatory budgeting process that's really actually centered on racial justice and building alternatives to safety that don't look like traditional community policing that has caused harm in communities across the country, but especially in places like Seattle. And so not only are we seeing this instance of PB in Seattle, but we're seeing instances of participatory budgeting in local schools. If you look at Phoenix, Arizona, for example, they're going through a participatory budgeting process to the tune of $1.3 million, where students, parents and guardians and staff members, teachers are really thinking through ways to reimagine safety and make decisions about their school district budget in how investments should be made that kind of really drive home and support community-driven solutions to keep people safe. The premise here being that folks closest to the issues are also going to be closest to the solutions. And we see processes like that across the country, from places in New York City to really smaller places like Merced, California.
So, Shari, how does it sort of work in real life? I know, traditionally, most of us feel we elect members of a city council or a county council or even a school board in some cases, and we give them the responsibility and authority, therefore, to make budget decisions on our behalf. So that is also taking place here. But you're then suggesting that even within that, there's an opportunity for members of the community to say, Well, I don't want to speculate. To say what? To say I want more kindergarten classes versus something else?
Well, I think to your point, how government decisions around budgets typically work is a guy or a small group of guys looks at the expenses from last year, makes a guess on what the expenses for a next calendar year are going to look like, and they might present those to another guy or a small group of guys, and then that ends up being the city budget. And so folks along the side, community activists, organizers, community leaders are like waving their hands and yelling in different things that should be changed about the budget. As you can imagine, or as many people have felt, it's a really difficult process to not only have your voice heard, but to make the right kinds of investments in a community. Participatory budgeting is different because it goes through a couple of phases. And we're not talking about identifying new line items in a city budget or institution budget. We're talking about identifying spaces where we can make decisions together so that we're spending time on the right priorities and investing in the most impactful things that community members need. And so when we think about a participatory budgeting process, there are 5 or 6 key phases. The first one is the design phase, where a steering committee comes together to write the rules of the process transparently, to your point, so that everyone can understand what this is, how they participate, and how it's going to work. The next phase typically is something that we call idea generation or idea collection. This is where we go out into community, local transit stops, grocery stores, really wherever that steering committee of community members that have expertise says that we need to be for outreach. We collect hundreds, if not thousands of ideas about a particular community on how to improve it. And then we move to this phase called proposal development. Here is where community members form teams alongside agency staff, and they research those ideas. They kind of invite in their lived experience and expertise alongside that lived experience and expertise of agency staff members and employees, and they're able to reflect back really simple and digestible proposals that obviously make it to a final ballot. The beautiful thing about participatory budgeting is nothing makes it onto that final ballot unless it has been fully vetted. That final ballot goes out to people. And unlike traditional local or national elections, usually in a PB vote, you have a week or two to participate in the vote. That vote goes out to where people are. And so it looks like community centers, grocery stores, like I mentioned before. It might be Friday night lights, depending on the community. No two communities are the same. So no two PB processes are exactly identical. But once we're able to bring that vote out to where people are, and we see folks with varying citizenship status participate, we've seen people participate of all ages. In Oakland, California, there was no minimum voting age. So anyone of any age that could participate or engage with the materials could actually participate in budget decisions. And then last but not least, once that vote happens, folks are able to follow the implementation of the projects, evaluate the overall process, and then begin again. Usually when we do participatory budgeting, it marks a change in the way government or an institution does business.
So, Shari, you used the example of Oakland. I was fascinated. Do you recall what people were actually voting on with regard to the budget in the example you used?
In the instance of Oakland, this is really exciting because this was CDBG funds, Community Development Block Grant funding. So this is federal dollars that folks were making decisions on the district level. And people were really thinking about anti-poverty initiatives, resilience initiatives. And so it looked like support for organizations and foundations that are addressing those issues. It also looked like physical improvements to spaces that community members could vote on that not only make a space more beautiful, but make it more environmentally safe. Across the last 12 or 13 years that we've seen PB happen in the United States, the types of projects that have been funded have really been diverse, whether it be increased Wi-Fi access or broadband access in a particular neighborhood that has been divested from, whether it has been the creation of art walls in a space where people have been criminalized for canvassing their art, and now they have a safe space to display their art, or whether it's been transforming public spaces to make them more accessible. In the instance of the city of Boston and many other communities across the country, we've seen folks really come together to reimagine how to utilize public spaces so that not only can they use them, but they can invite more people into them so that folks can not only be together, but experience a growing relationship to safety when you know your community members and can come together and build relationships.
Fascinating. Shari, given that, at least in my experience, government budgeting is more or less is often a zero-sum game, that you have to give money to something, you have to take it then from something else. When folks are participating in these decisions, is that are they making choices like that? Okay, yes, we'd like the community center to be open more hours, but we realize we're only going to, we're going to lose a couple of folks who, clean to mow the lawns, less often, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, the way that I hear you asking this question is, do people have to choose between things in a PB process? And the answer is yes. Oftentimes we're considering finite resources, but the beauty of participatory budgeting, again, is understanding community spending priorities and having an opportunity to invest in them and open up those communication channels. And so often in a PB process, a community member that's getting ready to issue a vote is looking at 20, maybe 30 projects on a particular ballot, and they might have 4 or 5 votes or priority points to indicate across that ballot. So they do have to kind of choose between things, but really that's an opportunity to kind of focus on the right, most impactful, most feasible work that is going to have the biggest change or impact or address the largest need in a particular community. And so you're able to get a sense of that from a PB process, but you're also able to see community members really shape what investments look like and should look like in their space.
Shari, these votes that are taking place and obviously are increasingly widespread, I imagine, as PB, you have an acronym for it, PB, participatory budgeting. As that expands, are these votes creating, are they advisory to elected officials, or are they actually required outcomes depending upon how a vote goes?
Such a good question. When we do participatory budgeting, we really work with elected officials on the front end to ensure that what community members vote on will actually happen in community. And so there are some places where a city ordinance or charter has been changed that mandates participatory budgeting and the follow through of the community vote. There are some places and spaces where it's actually connected to political will. But at the end of the day, when we think about participatory budgeting, a cornerstone of it is ensuring that this is not just a recommendation or consultative process, but instead the community-led decision-making is at the center. And so the best PB and the PB that Participatory Budgeting Project is involved with doesn't look like recommendations, but instead looks like decisions around how budgets are spent and allocated by people that live in a community.
So let me, in conclusion, this is, again, fascinating. And obviously you are an enthusiastic advocate and certainly one that understands this. So how do people learn more about your PB project, your participatory budgeting project? How do they contact you? Where do they go to just learn more about the concept?
If folks want to learn more, if folks want to build and bring PB into their spaces that they're in, they can check out the Participatory Budgeting Project's website at participatorybudgeting.org. We also maintain a growing national coalition of folks that are movement organizers, space creators, and democracy and social justice advocates called Democracy Beyond Elections. And so if folks want to learn more about how to build tools, how to be part of building tools, and how to bring participatory participatory budgeting across the country, they can get down with our Democracy Beyond Elections Coalition at democracybeyondelections.org.
Thank you very much, Shari. This has been quite fascinating, and we wish you luck in advancing the concept.
Thank you so much.
This has been David Nevins for Citybiz List, and once again, another of our conversations in conjunction with the Bridge Alliance, in which we are talking about ways to repair America's broken democracy. Once again, David Nevins for Citybiz List. Thank you so much, Shari Davis, and thank you for tuning in. We'll talk to you again soon.